Every sip sweetens the tongue, but bitterness lingers. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I'm your host, Harrington. Tell me your city below. I love reading them. The case begins now. It was one of those afternoons when the brownstone had settled into its preferred rhythm. Wolfe upstairs in the plant rooms bullying orchids into obedience, Fritz in the kitchen coaxing flavor out of a sauce that didn't need coaxing, and me at my desk pretending to type notes when in fact I was considering whether the Yankees' bullpen was doomed for the season. Peaceful, predictable. The kind of day when you could almost forget Wolfe's existence depended on disturbances paying for the groceries. So naturally, the doorbell rang. Fritz looked to me and I looked to him. We both knew the arrangement. I was the doorman, the bouncer, and the human filter. Fritz went back to his sauce. I went to the front. Standing there was a man who had dressed as if he expected a camera crew to leap from behind the hedge. Dark suit, dark tie, handkerchief folded like it was drawn with a ruler. But it wasn't the clothes that caught me. It was the bottle in his hands. Not a wrapped package, not a briefcase. A wine bottle, cradled like a baby. The label was old, the glass dark green, the cork stamped in a faded emblem. He held it out as if it might burst into aria any second. "Archie Goodwin?" he asked, in a tone that suggested if I denied it, he'd read me my lineage until I admitted otherwise. "That's me," I said. "And you're either a salesman with eccentric props or a man who wants to see Nero Wolfe. Which is it?" His eyes flicked over me like I was an undercooked entree. "My name is Simon Nash. This is a matter for Mr. Wolfe himself." He lifted the bottle slightly. "And it concerns this. Now, usually, people bring Wolfe money problems, love problems, or the problem of a corpse in the wrong place. Rarely do they bring him a bottle of wine. Still, I figured Wolfe would either snarl at the intrusion or be seduced by the vintage. Either way, it would relieve my boredom. I took him inside and parked him in the office. The room seemed to shrink around him. He had the air of a man who believed furniture should make way when he entered. He placed the bottle carefully on Wolfe's desk blotter, as if it deserved the seat of honor. When Wolfe came down 10 minutes later, pink from the heat of the orchids and scowling at having to earn his keep before dinner, Nash stood. Wolfe stopped, one brow lifting at the sight of the bottle. "Well," Wolfe said, lowering himself into his chair with the usual sigh that carried 3 ounces of suffering and 2 of disdain. "Wine has entered my house without my bidding." Explained Nash, inclined his head. "Mr. Wolfe, this is a Chateau Montrachet, bottled in 1921. It is not only rare, it is, I fear, poisoned." That woke Wolfe faster than a telegram from the IRS. His eyes, normally as mobile as a stone, idols, sharpened. "Poisoned?" "Yes." Nash's voice had the cadence of a man delivering testimony under oath. "This is the last surviving bottle of a case once owned by my family. 3 weeks ago, my cousin uncorked one during a gathering at our estate in Westchester. He collapsed before the glass touched his lips. The coroner ruled it a heart attack. But I know better. The wine had been tampered with. And this," he gestured reverently, "is the proof." I gave him the eye. "And you brought it here? If you're right, we should be calling the police, not giving Wolfe a chance to pair it with the roast duck." Nash's jaw tightened. "The police will not understand the delicacy. My family's reputation, the estate, our winery, it cannot be dragged through mud. I need discretion, Mr. Wolfe, and intellect. They say you possess both. Flattery is flummery," Wolfe said, dry as a martini. "You wish me to determine whether this wine is poisoned, and if so, by whom?" "Why me?" "Because," Nash replied, "no one else could resolve such a matter without spectacle. And because my aunt, who knew you by reputation, insisted that only Nero Wolfe could be trusted." Wolfe closed his eyes. This was his way of deciding whether to dismiss a man outright or toy with him until the retainer cleared. Wine is sacred. Adulteration is sacrilege, but I am not a toxicologist. That is why, Nash said smoothly, I will pay handsomely for your orchestration. You command, others test. I merely ask you to uncover the hand that tainted the bottle. I watched Wolfe's lips twitch, which for him was the equivalent of rolling on the floor in indecision. He hated moving outside his lanes, food and orchids. But insult to wine, that was a personal assault. Archie, he said finally, bring glasses. But do not open it. I raised my brows. You planning to have Fritz taste test, or do we invite the police coroner for supper? Phooey. I merely wished to examine. Nash handed over the bottle with a reverence that made me nervous. Wolfe turned it in his massive fingers, studying cork, seal, sediment. Then he set it down, as if it might explode. Very well, Wolfe said. I will consider your proposition. But I do nothing without understanding the battlefield. Who benefits from poisoning your cousin? Nash's expression shifted just slightly, like shutters closing on a window. There are complexities, business disputes, inheritance disputes, a circle of suspects, if you will, and you wish me to sift them. Yes, Wolfe grunted. Archie, take Mr. Nash's particulars. I pulled out my notebook. Names, connections, grudges. Start talking. Nash listed them as if reading from an internal ledger. Margaret Nash, the grieving widow who stood to inherit the estate. Pauline Leclerc, a vintner and long-time business partner who had quarreled over distribution, rights. Victor Nash, Simon's younger brother, restless and ambitious, lately hinting at taking control. Daniel Royce, a rival importer who had once courted Margaret and never forgiven her refusal. By the time he finished, my pages looked like the guest list for a funeral where no one cried sincerely. Wolfe leaned back, interlacing his fingers over his belly. Wine, he murmured, is not merely drink. It is memory, vanity, lineage. To poison it is to poison a heritage. This intrigues me, which, translated, meant Wolfe was hooked. Nash exhaled. Then you will take the case. I will take the case, Wolfe said, for a fee of $25,000. Half in advance, Nash didn't blink. He produced a checkbook. As Wolfe watched him sign, I leaned back in my chair and eyed the bottle. A poisoned bottle of wine, a circle of relatives and rivals, and Wolfe stirred from his inertia, not by money but by the insult to his palate. I had the distinct feeling that whatever vintage this case turned out to be, it was going to be bitter indeed. This sets up the hook. The arrival of Simon Nash with a suspicious bottle. Wolfe's reluctant but inevitable interest, because it's wine. Archie's sharp narration and humor. The introduction of 4 suspects via Nash's account. Nash's check lay on Wolfe's desk like a promise that couldn't be rescinded, though Wolfe studied it as if it were a chess piece he hadn't decided to move yet. He had leaned back with his eyes half closed, giving every impression of drowsiness, though I knew the gray matter was churning away. Nash, stiff in his chair, waited for a verdict that wasn't coming that minute. I'd seen it before. Wolfe would let a man stew until he had softened into something pliable, then ask the question that skewered him. Archie, Wolfe finally said, place the bottle in the cabinet. Top shelf, right corner. Handle it with care. Understood, I said and got up. I carried the Montrachet like it was nitroglycerin, set it where instructed, and locked the cabinet. That done, I returned to my desk and perched, pen in hand, ready to take down the inevitable grilling. But Wolfe didn't oblige. He simply shifted his gaze back to Nash. You said your cousin died before tasting. The glass was filled. Yes. He collapsed after raising it. Who poured? My aunt. She opened the bottle herself with her own corkscrew. She filled her husband's glass, then her own. She tasted nothing unusual, but his body failed at once. Yet you suspect poison. Nash's jaw tightened. The doctor was too quick with his judgment. My cousin was vigorous, no history of illness, and his eyes flicked toward the cabinet. I had the remaining bottles examined. Several had corks that looked disturbed. Not broken, but altered. That made Wolfe's lips purse. So you bring one of them to me. I bring the last. I kept it untouched so the truth might be found. Pooh. Wolfe opened his eyes fully, and the weight of his stare fell on Nash. You ask me to risk the sanctity of my home with a lethal object? I abhor trespass. Nash spread his hands. Then you understand my urgency. If the taint is proven, it was deliberate. If it was deliberate, someone close to my family is guilty of more than malice. The room went still for a beat. Fritz's faint clatter came from the kitchen. A clock ticked with prim insistence. Wolfe turned to me. Archie, tomorrow you will go to Westchester. You will speak with Mrs. Nash, the widow. Ascertain her disposition. Observe. Sure, I said. You want me to bring back her corkscrew as Exhibit A, or just the family skeletons? Both, if possible. And see the cellars. I wish to know the provenance of those bottles. Nash leaned forward. If you visit, you must be careful. Tensions are high. My brother, my aunt, Pauline Leclerc, they will not welcome outside interference. Then why send me? I asked. Because you are not outside. You are Wolfe's emissary. That gives you authority. That was a novel interpretation, but I didn't argue. Wolfe waved a hand. Enough. You have delivered your bottle and your money. Archie will attend to the preliminaries. I will speak again when I have information. Nash rose. He retrieved his hat, but not the bottle, which sat locked in its new cell. He gave me a curt nod, Wolfe a stiff bow, and left. When the door shut, Wolfe grunted. Bah, this will bring a parade of fools through my office. Intolerable. Then why take it? I asked. His eyes half closed again. Because a bottle of wine is a relic of earth and time. To poison it is blasphemy. And because, he added, the man lied, I straightened. Which part? All of it, perhaps. His eagerness, his certainty, he was too rehearsed. We shall see. That was as much as I would get for the night. Wolfe signaled for beer. Fritz brought it, and I resigned myself to heading north in the morning to meet the clan Nash and their assorted resentments. The next day was crisp, sun sharp enough to make the trees along the highway look as if they'd been lacquered. The Nash estate rose behind gates that suggested money was older than manners. I drove up the curved drive, parked, and got greeted by a man in uniform who inspected me like I'd driven up in a stolen jalopy. Once satisfied I wasn't here to rob the silver, he escorted me to the door. Margaret Nash received me in a parlor that could have held our entire office and still had space left over for a polo match. She was tall, elegant, in black silk. Widowhood suited her the way a veil suits a statue. An ornament, not a burden. You're Mr. Goodwin, she said. Simon telephoned. He didn't warn me you'd come so soon. I'm punctual when wine is in danger, I said. That earned the faintest quirk of her lips. She led me to sit. The room smelled faintly of oak and polish. She offered tea. I declined. I preferred information. I'll be frank, she said. I don't like Simon's theatrics. My husband died of natural causes. To say otherwise is cruel, but you opened the bottle. Yes, and I drank from it. It was flawless. My husband's heart was not her voice hardened. Simon drags outsiders into our grief because he wants suspicion cast away from himself. Do not be fooled. There it was. The first salvo. In families like this, grief was never solitary. It was a weapon, I let her talk. She did, painting Simon as an opportunist, Victor as a schemer, Pauline as a bitter partner, Royce as a hanger-on. Each name she dropped carried the weight of old grudges. When she paused, I asked casually, "Where's the rest of that case of Montrachet?" "In the cellar. Under lock. But you'll find nothing. My husband bought it before we married. It has been here decades. Whoever touched it, if anyone did, is long gone." I didn't press further. She was already bristling. I stayed just long enough to get the lay of the land and the confirmation Wolfe wanted. This house was thick with motive. On my way out, I passed a man on the steps, thinner, younger, restless in motion. Victor Nash. He gave me a glance sharp enough to cut cloth and muttered something under his breath as we crossed. It wasn't friendly. By the time I was back in the car, I had more names and contradictions than fit on a page. Wolfe would savor them the way he savored a good sauce. And he'd do it without leaving his chair, while I did the legwork. That, as usual, was the deal. I didn't point the car back to the city. If there's one thing Wolfe likes even less than having strangers in the office, it's having to send me out twice for what I could have done once. Pauline Leclerc's place was 20 minutes from the Nash estate. Vine rows stitched the hills like neat handwriting, and a square brick building sat at the base with a sign that didn't try hard. Leclerc and Nash. Imports? The "and" had no romance in it. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of oak and ambition. Pauline was on the phone in French, clipped and tidy, and if I were the jealous type, I would have envied the phone for being on the receiving end. She finished, eyed me, and gave a smile that stopped one notch before warmth. "You are Mr. Goodwin," she said. "Simon warned me he had loosed you. I prefer requested, but loosed is picturesque. I come with questions and an appetite for candor." "Ah," she said, "then you will starve." She motioned me to a small table near a wall of ledgers. "What do you wish to know?" "Let's begin easy. Your partnership with the Nashes. How healthy is it?" She tilted her head. "As healthy as any relationship that depends on money and pride. Margaret is proper and likes the numbers to behave. Victor wants to prove he is clever. Simon wants to be seen. Their cousin wanted to drink. I made the wine move and prosper. What is healthy? That we still do business." "And the bottle," I said. "Rather, the case of bottles. The Montrachet." Her eyes flicked not to the ledgers, but to a framed photograph of barrels stacked like soldiers. "Ah, the relics. You know, in this country you have a way of worshipping old things as if they excuse the present. Yes, there was a case. Yes, it sat in the cellar for years. Yes, someone handled it who should not have. I let the silence show inclination. She filled it. 3 weeks before the party, I saw the rack had been dusted improperly. Bottles were not returned in the same order. A capsule on one had a seam that was too clean, as if repressed. I told Margaret. She said I was dramatizing. I told Victor. He said I was insulting the staff. I told Simon. He said... She gave a delicate shrug. He would take care. Meaning? Meaning he would make it about him. He insisted the party must feature the bottle. He made an occasion. It is what he does that put a new polish on Simon's urgency. Who has keys to the cellar? Margaret, of course. Victor, the house steward, Ellis. And Simon steals what he needs by borrowing and returning with a story. Daniel Royce? Her mouth made a shape as if the name tasted of iron. He is not of the house. He is a parasite of the trade. He comes with offers and leaves with gossip. He would not have a key. He would have a favor he could call a key. I asked for receipts, movement logs, any paper trail. Pauline slid 2 ledgers across with the efficiency of someone who has been audited and found right. The entries around the party week were neat, signed by Ellis, deliveries in. No removals noted. Too neat is a flag. A cellar that never moves is a museum, not a pantry. Where can I find Ellis? In the estate's shadow, always, she said. He has served there 20 years. He believes the wine belongs to him morally and to the family legally. He is loyal to the idea of them last, I said. You and Margaret quarrel about distribution rights. We disagreed. She wants predictability. I want growth. We compromised, and then we resented the compromise. But I would not kill her husband or her legacy. I have my own, she stood, signaling I had been entertained enough. At the door, she added, Tell Mr. Wolfe that whoever touched that bottle did not do it to destroy a life. They did it to direct a story. On the way to the car, a man unpeeled himself from a sun-warmed sedan and pretended he hadn't. Tall, good suit that didn't belong to him. Face you forget unless you've made a habit of noticing forgettable faces. He fell in step like we were old friends. Goodwin, he said, casual as a cop at a picnic. Name's Royce. Daniel, you're wasting your time with Pauline. She what's the word? She dramatizes. The real action's with the brothers. Then why were you dramatizing the sidewalk outside her office? He grinned, used to being caught and not minding. I sell wine. I follow buyers. You're not a buyer. You're a broom. Simon sent you to sweep. He's theatrical, but he's right. His cousin didn't just die. Because men like that don't die at parties without someone wanting them to. He leaned closer, breath mint-strong. Ask about the codicil. The new one? I'd love to. To whom? To the will. The old man, call him what you like, added language. A week before the party, beneficiaries adjusted. You find the lawyer. You find motive. He stepped back, gave me a wink intended to be raffish and landing as oily, and slid into his car. He didn't offer a ride. I didn't request one. I phoned Wolfe from a diner with coffee that fought back. He listened while I lined up Pauline's observations, Ellis's name, the too-clean capsule, and Royce's codicil. He made no sounds except the occasional breath that meant disapproval of humanity. 2 items, he said when I finished. First, the lawyer. Ascertain the existence and terms of any amendment. Second, Ellis. His loyalty may have been conscripted. If the ledger is immaculate, someone laundered it. You think Simon? I think Simon is a man who stages scenes and then complains about the lighting. But do not be seduced by his performance. If he is guilty, he will play the victim to the hilt. If he is innocent, he will play the hero. Either way, he will play. Any counsel for dealing with Ellis? Yes. Do not insult his competence. Ask him to teach you. Men who guard basements have been underestimated since the first amphora. I paid for the coffee out of petty cash and drove back to the estate. Ellis met me in a passage that smelled of stone and cool water. He was 50, lean as a corkscrew, with hands that looked strong enough to break a neck and gentle enough to cradle a glass. I heard you are here to see what you cannot understand, he said. There was no malice in it. On the contrary, I told him, I'm here to be educated. He showed me shelves by vintages, tags handwritten and aging better than ink has a right to. When we came to the Montrachet slot, he didn't touch it, only looked. The space for the missing bottles was clean. The remaining few had capsules that matched, except one with a faint irregularity where wax met glass, a ridge you could miss if you trusted your eyes more than your fingers. This, Ellis said quietly, wasn't like this before the dusting. Who dusted? I did. And I do not forget my own work. Who else came down here that week? Family, he said. Always family. Simon. He paused, then nodded. With a story about impressing a guest, Victor. Twice, he said he was learning the inventory. He brought a notebook and no patience, Margaret. She doesn't come often. When she does, She comes to remember I left him with a thank you and no accusations. Back in the car, I looked at my notes and saw they were starting to arrange themselves without my help. A bottle touched to tell a story, a will adjusted to change a story, a family eager to decide who authored which chapter. If Wolfe was right, he usually is, the wine wasn't only a weapon, it was a sentence. All I had to do was figure out who wrote it and why they wanted it to end at that particular place. I headed for the city, with the feeling the last person I spoke to that day would be the first to resent it tomorrow. By the time I rolled the sedan back into 35th Street and guided it into the garage, the sun was low enough to stain the brownstone bricks a Red Wolf would have found poetic if he weren't so committed to hating the outdoors. I took my notes upstairs, knocked once out of habit, and entered the office. Wolfe was at his desk with a book on his lap, but his eyes weren't on the page. He looked up, saw me, and said only, "Report." I laid it out as neat as I could. Margaret's denial and disdain for Simon's story, Pauline's suspicion and the dusted rack, Royce's oily reference to a codicil, and Ellis's careful confirmation that bottles had been disturbed. Wolfe listened without interruption, save for one grunt when I quoted Pauline about the story being directed. When I finished, I half expected him to close his eyes and announce he had the answer. Case solved, humanity once again exposed in all its sordid glory. Instead, he stayed still and tapped a thick finger against the desk blotter. "The codicil," he said at last. "That is our lever." Did Royce specify the lawyer? No, he was too busy enjoying his role as mysterious tipster. I can chase it down tomorrow. Court records or a discreet question at the county clerk, Wolfe frowned. Too slow. Call Lon Cohen. The Gazette will have whispered it already. Reporters are grave diggers of paper trails. I phoned Lon while Wolfe closed his eyes again, pretending disinterest. Lon liked being useful, so long as I didn't quote him in print, and after a few minutes of banter he gave me a name. Jeremiah K. Blount, family attorney for 2 decades. Lon also hinted that the codicil wasn't small potatoes, something about a redistribution that had startled more than one insider who saw it. I thanked him, promised not to credit him with anything printable, and hung up. Wolfe's eyes opened a fraction. Blount. We must speak with him, though he may resist. He'll resist, I said. Lawyers breathe resistance. But if the codicil favored Simon, that makes our client less of a grieving nephew and more of a man with a golden ticket. Precisely. Simon is performing a passion play. Whether he wrote the script or merely accepted a role remains to be seen. Just then, Fritz appeared at the door, not with food, but with unease. He rarely intruded unless dinner was in peril, and I was already half on my feet. He carried a small silver tray, and on it lay a note in an envelope without a stamp. "Delivered by hand," Fritz said. "A boy left it and ran." I took it, slit it open, and read. 2 lines, printed in block letters. "Stop asking about the wine. Let the dead rest. No signature, no flourish. Just ink and threat." I handed it across to Wolfe. He read, snorted, and dropped it into the drawer without ceremony. "So, the trespass begins. You call this trespass? I call it warning. The bottle in my cabinet was intrusion enough. This," he gestured at the note, "is confirmation. Someone fears discovery. That is progress." It was also a reminder that the case wasn't confined to the Nash estate anymore. The brownstone itself had been brushed by whatever poison clung to that family. Wolfe disliked such disturbances more than he disliked exercise, which was saying something. He summoned beer and poured slowly, eyes narrowed at the foam. "Archie, tomorrow morning you will fetch Mr. Blount here. Use firmness but not force. He must explain the codicil in my presence, and if he won't budge, then tell him I shall subpoena him with Simon's money. He will understand." That night, the brownstone's calm was a performance none of us believed. Fritz's dinner was excellent, but Wolfe's silence at table was heavier than the duck. Afterward, I sat in my room and considered the note. A hand-delivered warning meant someone was close enough to risk stepping into our neighborhood. Either a family member had sent a messenger, or someone in their employ was watching my movements. I wasn't spooked, but it was the first time since the case began that I wondered if Simon's bottle might carry more danger than metaphor. Morning brought a different tone. Blount agreed, with the enthusiasm of a man facing dental work, to come down after lunch. He arrived in a grey suit cut 30 years ago and a hat that belonged to no season. Wolfe greeted him with the courtesy he reserves for old servants of institutions, then motioned him to the red leather chair. "Mr. Blount," Wolfe said. The codicil Blount blinked. "Confidential." "Phooey. Confidentiality expires the moment murder intrudes. You will tell us who benefited." Blount's lips pursed. "There was no murder." "The coroner's report." "Bah, spare me." The codicil Blount shifted, sighed, and gave it up. The principal change was the allocation of the winery shares. Originally, Margaret retained majority. The codicil increased Simon's portion substantially, reducing Victor's. Pauline remained as partner but lost leverage. Daniel Royce, of course, received nothing. I wrote it down while Wolfe absorbed. His eyes gleamed. "So Simon profits doubly if his cousin dies. He inherits more, and he claims to be champion of purity by hiring me. A neat stratagem." Blount's jaw stiffened. "Simon insisted his uncle made the amendment willingly. I drew it at his instruction." Wolfe leaned forward. "At whose?" Blount hesitated. "At the uncle's." But Simon was present. When he left, Wolfe sat back and closed his eyes. The stage is set. Each suspect has cause, but only one has the temerity to thrust a bottle upon me and demand inquiry. "You're saying Simon poisoned his own uncle and dragged us in to prove it wasn't him?" "I'm saying he wishes to control the narrative. Whether that absolves or indicts him, we shall see. For now, Archie, have Saul Panzer make discreet inquiries. I want surveillance on Simon, Victor, and Pauline, their movements, their meetings. The bottle is bait. Let us see who bites." It was late afternoon when I called Saul, and he agreed without hesitation. As I hung up, Wolfe finally let out a long sigh, as if acknowledging the brownstone had been fully disturbed. He picked up his book again, but didn't turn the page. I knew then that whatever threads had been laid, he was already winding them tight around someone's neck. Dinner nearly restored the brownstone to its illusion of safety. Fritz brought duck with bittersweet orange and a salad that would have made a rabbit weep for joy, and Wolfe chewed his way through both with the air of a man who has decided to let digestion handle philosophy. I was halfway to proposing that the warning note's author had overestimated his own handwriting when Fritz appeared at the office door with a look I'd seen only twice. Once when Wolfe tried to improve a sauce, and once when a visiting chef salted the soup without asking. "Excuse me," Fritz said, and the words came clipped, which is how he sounds when keeping profanity out of English. "Someone has moved my spices." Wolfe didn't lift an eyebrow. He vaulted one. "Moved?" "In the rack," Fritz said. "The juniper jar is not the juniper jar. The lid does not belong to it, and the jar is a finger's width forward of the line I keep." He looked at me. "I wipe and return every evening. Tonight it was wrong I stood. Could be you were interrupted." "The boy with the note?" Fritz shook his head. "I was in the cellar when he came. The kitchen was empty 10 minutes. That is all." Wolfe's eyes had flattened. "Archie, go look." I went. In Fritz's realm, deviations are neon. The rack along the prep table held brown glass jars with labels in Fritz's hand, slanted and precise. You could have aligned a plumb line on them. One jar did sit a fraction forward of its neighbors, and when I unscrewed the lid, it bit the threads wrong and squeaked. The label read, "Juniper." The smell that rose was wrong by a shade. Juniper, yes, but tired, like a sachet that had been keeping a drawer company too long. I checked the lid of the next jar, and then the next. They were twins to their mates. Only this one wore a hat from a different set. I took the jar and lid back. Fritz accepted them with the care he reserves for knives. "This is not mine," he said low. "Someone took the lid from another jar and replaced it. Perhaps they opened it. Perhaps they did not. But a hand was there." In my kitchen, Wolfe motioned to my chair with his chin. "We are being touched," he said. "First a note, now a jar. An experiment, Archie, a test of our senses. If we notice nothing, we are blind. If we notice, they measure our alarm." He paused. "Go to the office cabinet." I crossed to the corner and took out my key. The lock turned as usual. The bottle sat where I'd put it. Top shelf, right corner, label angled at 10 o'clock. Only it wasn't. The label pointed closer to 11. You can call that my imagination if you've never worked for a man who remembers precisely how an object rested 6 hours ago. I reached in without touching glass and looked at the shelf dust. The faint ring where the bottle had sat wasn't perfect anymore. There was a new half-moon a finger's width forward. I leaned and sniffed, and if you think I'm going to say I smelled poison, you're buying a different brand of detective. What I smelled was beeswax, faint and recent, the kind you'd use on a cork if you'd wanted to mask a tamper. "Report," Wolfe said. "Someone admired the Montrachet," I told him. "Turned the label shy and set it down an inch off its footprint. Either they're sloppy or they wanted us to know." "Both," Wolfe said. He didn't rise. He didn't even lean. But his voice thinned. "Who has been in this room since you put it away?" "Simon. Blount Fritz with the note." "Me? You? That's the list. Fritz would sooner set himself on fire than touch your arrangement," Wolfe said. "Blount is old and reverent of rules. Simon is theatrical. And you, Archie, are not a somnambulist. We are left with the possibility that a key was borrowed, copied, or unnecessary." "The lock looks clean," I said. "No scratches." "And the drawer with your key?" "Locked," he said, "as it is now." Which suggests either the key was taken and returned, or someone knew our habits well enough to enter and test when the office stood empty. Fritz had retreated to the threshold and stood there with his arms folded, dignity and fury coming out even. Wolfe's eyes went to him. "Fritz, did any deliveries come to the back today?" "Vegetables at 4. The man is new. The grocer sent a boy, not the regular. He stacked crates and left. Find me his name," Wolfe said. "And Archie, telephone Saul. Our perimeter is to be watched, with attention to the alley and the kitchen entrance. I will not have this house used as a stage I called Saul." He listened, said uh-huh and and promised to put a man on the alley within the hour, and to take the first watch himself from a car down the block. When I hung up, Wolfe had taken the jar from Fritz and was turning the lid in his fingers with the sort of disdain he usually reserves for people. "The juniper is inferior," he announced. "Whoever made the substitution did not expect the cook to taste. He expected the cook to see. This is a signal, not sabotage." "Then the bottle?" "The same. They have not the nerve to remove it. They wish us to know I can call Kramer," I said, not because I wanted to see the room filled with police boots, but because the idea needed saying. "No," Wolfe said. "Inspector Kramer will come when I summon him, not when a fool leaves fingerprints in my house, and he will come to be told the conclusion, not to thump about and smudge inference." He looked at me. "We will answer trespass with order. Tomorrow you will visit Simon and ask him whom he told of his visit here. Then you will go to Victor and ask what he is willing to do to prevent his brother from gaining the winery. Phrase it so. Watch his pupils. After that, speak to Pauline again and inform her that someone tried to reach the bottle. Gauge whether she is relieved or affronted. Why not call them here and save me the mileage? Because if our intruder is in their circle, and he is, he will be steadier on home ground. Let him choose comfort, and we shall see his tells. He left the jar lid drop to the blotter. Meanwhile, I shall bait. By sending an invitation. By sending a rumor. You will telephone Mr. Blount at 9 in the morning and ask him to attend here at 4. Speak of formalities. Use a tone that implies we intend to open the bottle under controlled conditions. Say nothing definite. Then we shall wait to see who hurries to stop us. I nodded. And if no one hurries? They will. Poisoners abhor uncertainty. Fritz took back his jar at last, holding it like a wounded bird. He bowed, a small hinge of an action, and left to reclaim his realm. Wolfe sat and steepled his fingers, not looking at the cabinet, because it would have been beneath him to give an adversary the satisfaction of seeing him attend. I locked the door to the office and checked the windows, not because it would keep anyone determined out, but because you do the small things when the large ones are not yet in reach. At 11, Saul phoned. A man had loitered near the alley from 9 to 10, hat pulled low, coat too heavy for the weather. When Saul approached, he drifted to Lexington and vanished into a cab. We filed that under ordinary caution elevated by circumstance, which is most of detective work. Wolfe listened, grunted, and told Saul to double the watch between noon and 4. Why 4? I asked. Because, Wolfe said, that is when the rumor will ripen, and whoever touched my jar and my bottle will decide whether to pluck. He closed his eyes then, not to sleep, but to shut out disorder, and the office fell quiet, except for the clock reminding us that time is the one trespasser none of us can evict. At 9 on the nose, I telephoned Blount and gave him Wolfe's summons for 4 o'clock, adding a shade of suggestion that we would address the bottle, formally under controlled conditions. He sighed like a man remembering dental work and agreed. There was a second voice in his office, male and courteous, that stopped speaking when I identified myself. When I hung up, I told Wolfe the codicil's midwife would be present, and he answered with a satisfied grunt that meant the bait was dangling. I started with Simon. He kept an apartment that had more mirrors than chairs and wore a suit that wanted compliments. He greeted me like a co-producer on opening night and tried to position me near a window for better lighting. When I asked who knew he had brought the Montrachet to Wolfe, he lifted his hands and gave me innocence with a flourish. Archie, I'm not a gossip, he protested. I told family, of course. Margaret, naturally. Victor, because he meddles. And Pauline, as a courtesy. No one else, no one, I said, except Daniel Royce, who overhears courtesies the way cats overhear can openers. That got the faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth. Daniel is inevitable. If there's a door, he's on the other side of it, but he doesn't matter. He matters enough to tell me about a codicil you neglected to mention. He spread his fingers. Why would I mention it? It's a family document. It has nothing to do with an adulterated bottle. Maybe. Or maybe it's the legend printed on the label. I watched his eyes when I added, "We've asked Blount to attend at 4. Controlled conditions. He smiled too quickly. Wise. Very wise. Keep it disciplined. Perhaps we can end the speculation. Whose speculation, he didn't say. He offered me coffee and a statement about his devotion to his uncle that sounded like it had been drafted by a small-town paper. When I left, I had the impression of a man who had learned his lines and was ready for notes from the director. On the sidewalk, a shadow detached and became Daniel Royce, wearing a grin like a salesman's label. He fell in step without asking. "Goodwin," he said, "you'll forgive the informality. I admire a man who works before lunch." "I admire a man who works at all," I said. "You follow everyone this faithfully, or am I special?" "Special," he assured me. "Word is you're opening a bottle at 4. He watched my face. Figuratively. "I don't comment on rumors," I said. "But if you have advice, I'll price it. Advice? He glanced at my shoes, a salesman's reflex. Only this. Opening that bottle, even for a sniff, makes you the story. The estate's insurers will dance. Blount will pull at his collar, and Ellis will mutter oaths in a language he doesn't speak. If your employer wants truth, he'll force the truth to come to him, not go climbing into a cellar he didn't build. You think truth has feet? I asked. It has a wallet, he said, and it hates uncertainty. Watch who tries to close the question before you ask it. He peeled away then, satisfied with having left something sticky behind, and I let him go. Victor's office was in a modern building that specialized in confidence without furniture. He kept me waiting long enough to establish hierarchy, then invited me in with the enthusiasm of a man signing for a package he didn't order. What, he said, will it take to stop Simon from ruining the winery? Your brother is our client, I told him. What will you do to prevent him from gaining it? His pupils clicked tight, then loosened. He barked a laugh that didn't survive its own echo. Whatever the law allows. Contest the codicil, freeze transfers, board maneuvers. I won't kill him if that's what you're implying. I'm implying nothing, I said. I'm observing that you went to the cellar twice the week of the party with a notebook and no patience. He stood and leaned on his desk with both fists like a man deciding whether to punch a wall or a mirror. I went to see what I'm fighting for. And to count. You can't fight numbers with adjectives. Is that a crime? Depends who wrote the numbers, I said. We've invited Blount to Mr. Wolfe's office this afternoon. He blinked. Why? To observe formalities, I said. Controlled conditions. That phrase was getting a workout. He tried a smirk and failed. If Simon thinks he can turn your boss into a performing seal, he's dumber than I'm unlucky. On my way to the elevator, he added, too quickly, you don't have to open anything. Just force him to say out loud what he's done. At 1:15, the brownstone rang me in a diner where the coffee could have removed rust. Fritz's voice was thin with distaste. A package was left at the back door. I did not open it. Saul was present. He opened it with a handkerchief. Inside was a corkscrew. Cheap. Any note? None. Saul came on. Whoever left it was fast and didn't look back. Hat low. Same coat as last night. He wants you to think you have a tool. Or that he does. Hold the corkscrew, I said. Wolfe will admire the symbolism. At 1:30, Blount called to say a client emergency would prevent his attendance at 4. He sounded like a boy insisting his dog had eaten the algebra. I repeated Wolfe's line about subpoena and Simon's money and let a little sympathy into my voice. Vanity is a lever when money is too obvious. He hemmed, hawed, and capitulated, promising to come briefly at least. I phoned Wolfe with the update. Good, Wolfe said. Someone has pressed him. Who? Take your pick, I said. Margaret for propriety, Simon for control, Victor for obstruction, Pauline for principle, Royce for mischief. Bah! Principle is for epitaphs. He paused. Return by 3:30. I swung north to Pauline's office. She didn't make me wait. When I told her someone had reached for the bottle in Wolfe's cabinet, the first thing across her face was not surprise. It was offense. So, she said, they think everything is theirs. Even what is under your roof, her accent sharpened the edges. Good. This means you have their attention. When people fear what a bottle contains, it is because they fear what its story will say about them. You relieved or affronted? I asked. Both, she said. Relieved that the hand shook. Affronted that it presumed she tapped the ledgers. Tell Mr. Wolfe, if he opens it, do it when a certain person cannot attend. Then watch who arrives anyway. Which certain person? She considered. The one who most needs to be seen, not to care. Back in the car, I phoned Ellis. He answered like a man who mistrusts wires. When I asked whether any keys had gone missing, he said no. When I asked if any had been borrowed, he said yes, once, the week of the party, for 3 hours, by Margaret's request for inventory. He had not liked it, but he had not refused. "That is my error," he said. "I cannot repair it." "Maybe," I told him. "You already have." He didn't ask how. I hit 35th Street at 3:35. Saul was parked a half-block down. He lifted a finger like a conductor marking a bar. "Your 4 o'clock has believers," he said when I slid into the office. "Simon's been standing on the corner 10 minutes pretending to read a paper." Victor came by taxi and circled, and a dark sedan with Westchester plates stopped and started twice. "Margaret?" I asked. "Could be. Could be a chauffeur who misses his gravel drive." He handed me the cheap corkscrew in its paper coffin. "If this is a dare, it's the timid kind." Wolfe didn't look at it. He was behind his desk, large and motionless, eyes half-lidded as if sleeping with malice. "We will see who prefers uncertainty to truth," he murmured. "Seat them as they arrive, Archie." No drinks. He let out a breath that might have been a sigh or a prelude and closed his eyes again. Outside, the bell rang, once, and Saul's step sounded in the hall. Whatever was about to be uncorked wouldn't need a corkscrew. Saul opened the door and ushered Blount in first, which was kind to the old man, and unkind to the rest. Blount's hat looked older than 2 of our chairs, and his collar had lost the will to live. He sank into the red leather, as if it were the only honest thing he'd met all day. I parked him where Wolfe wanted, facing the desk 3 feet from the cabinet, and took my post by the Globe, which I have learned is the best place to watch people pretend not to watch a bottle. Simon arrived next with a smile that asked for applause and a tie that seconded the motion. Victor came on Simon's heels, chose the far chair, and made a point of not looking at his brother. Margaret followed in a minute with a faint scent of iris and disapproval, and took the chair that let her see all of us at once. If there'd been a jury box, she'd have preferred it. Wolfe let the room settle like a sauce. He did not greet them beyond a nod that indicated they had found their way inside and therefore needed no further congratulations. He set his hands together, fingertips touching, and spoke as if he were reading all of us into the record. "You are here," he said, "because I announced an intention I have not yet formed. A bottle is in my keeping. I have been invited," his eyes moved once to Simon and back, "to open it under controlled conditions. An anonymous package delivered a corkscrew, cheap. My kitchen was trespassed. A jar was moved and its lid exchanged. My cabinet was tampered with. My house is not a stage. We will proceed with order." Blount coughed, the discreet kind that says a man is about to invoke the law. "Mr. Wolfe, any manipulation of the bottle?" "Pfui," Wolfe said, light as ash. "I do not manipulate. I observe. That is the first point. Second, each of you will answer a single question, and I will mark your answers. Mr. Nash, Simon, do you object to the bottle being opened here and now?" Simon's smile didn't flicker, but his hands circled each other once like startled fish. "Object," I urged it. "Let truth be truth. Noted." "Mr. Nash, Victor." Victor blew air through his nose. "Open it, don't open it. It won't change a will or a ledger. That was not the question." Wolfe's lids lowered a hair. "Do you object?" "No," he said after a beat. "I don't object." Wolfe turned to Margaret. "Mrs. Nash." Her chin lifted. "I object. This spectacle is indecent. My husband is dead. You would turn grief into entertainment. And you, Mr. B. Blount." Blount pinched 2 fingers together as if squeezing a statute. "I advise caution. The insurers—" "That is an objection." Wolfe let his hands part and come together again. 2 encourage, 2 demur. Good. Now the second question is not a question. It is a statement. 3 weeks before the party, the cellar keys were borrowed for 3 hours for inventory. During that time, racks were dusted and bottles misaligned. A capsule seam on one was repressed. Later, a bottle was opened and a man died before tasting. In my office yesterday, someone touched the bottle in my cabinet. Today, a corkscrew arrives. Whoever wishes to control the story lacks the composure to let it be told. Margaret's eyes flicked once toward Blount and back so fast you could call it a blink if you weren't paid to call it something else. Simon's gaze hopped to the cabinet, then to me, then to Wolfe, measuring odds. Victor found his cuff suddenly fascinating. Blount stared at his hat brim, which had no answers. "Mrs. Nash," Wolfe said, "you borrowed the keys." "I asked Ellis for them," she said steady. "I did inventory as I've done before. The house is mine to order, to disorder in this case," Wolfe murmured. "What bottle did you touch?" "None." She didn't blink. "I dusted shelves. I do not tamper with relics, yet you object to opening one." "Because I am not theatrical." Simon laughed gently, the way a man laughs when there are witnesses. "Aunt Margaret, if letting Mr. Wolfe do his work is theatre, then we are all actors. He is not a circus." "No," Wolfe said mildly. "I am not." Victor shifted. "Is this why I'm here? To watch a bottle get famous while a lawyer sweats?" "You are here," Wolfe said, "because you circle what you want and call it prudence. You went to the cellar twice the week of the party with a notebook and no patience. You have been circling this house as well. You do not object to opening because you believe the act hurts your brother, who urged it. You will reconsider if it threatens you." Victor's mouth twitched, which for him was a confession and a prayer. The bell rang. Saul's step crossed the hall. He put his head in. "Jeremiah Blount's clerk?" he said. "He says Mr. Blount is needed back at the office." Emergency Blount stood halfway and remembered his spine. "I'm here," he said thinly. "I can spare 10 minutes." "You cannot," Wolfe said. "You will remain until I dismiss you or until you decide to leave and explain later why you fled before a conclusion." "Sit Blount Saturday." Simon looked appreciatively annoyed. Victor snorted. Margaret didn't alter a molecule. I watched their hands. Simon's thumb rubbed the edge of his cuff and left a faint smudge of something colorless and dull on his skin. Wax? Or nerves polishing fabric? Victor's fingers drummed once and stopped when Margaret's gaze clipped them. "Mr. Blount," Wolfe said, "did you at any time counsel anyone here to prevent the bottle being examined?" Blount swallowed. "I advised all parties that publicity would be unfortunate." "All parties," Wolfe repeated, "including Mr. Royce?" Blount's eyes showed a flicker then, the first honest thing besides fatigue. "Mr. Royce is not my client. Yet he knows more than his station," Wolfe said. "He will stay in his lane or I will narrow it." Simon leaned forward, charm oiled and ready. "Mr. Wolfe, forgive me, but this begins to feel like a sermon. You gathered us to decide about the bottle." "Decide I gathered you," Wolfe said, "to see who would try to make me." He shifted a finger on the blotter. "Mr. Goodwin, open the cabinet and bring the bottle here." I did. The room tilted forward with me. I set the Montrachet on the desk blotter. It sat there like a relic, labeled at 10 o'clock. My work corrected. "No one will touch it," Wolfe said. "There will be no opening today." This is not timidity. It is opportunity. Between now and tomorrow noon, the person who moved my jar and my bottle will decide whether to let uncertainty stand or to remove it by force. He will try again. When he does, he will reveal his method. "Mr. Blount, you will remain available. Mrs. Nash, you will refrain from borrowing keys. Mr. Nash, Victor, if you circle my block again, you will find Mr. Pans are already inside your circle. And Simon lifted his chin, prepared for either benediction or slap. you will stop improving the lighting. If you are innocent, you are your own worst advocate. If you are guilty, you are worse than that. He closed his eyes, which for Wolfe was as close as he came to saying we were adjourned. I moved to the door. Margaret rose without a sound. Victor stood like a man dismissed by an enemy and unwilling to admit the rank. Simon hesitated, looked again at the bottle as if it might turn and wink at him, and then smiled at me in a way he thought friendly. Blount took his hat as if it might testify for him and followed them out. Saul hovered. "You want the alley covered all night?" "All night," I told him, "and the back door like a parish with a new lock. Someone's going to church before morning, and if we're lucky, he'll bring a hymn book." Night laid its weight on the brown stone the way a cat lays a paw on a mouse. Light enough to deny malice, heavy enough to warn. Fritz barred the kitchen door and pretended he wasn't listening. Saul settled in the sedan down the block. I parked myself in the office with the lights low and the desk lamp on. Wolfe sat as he sits, chair accepting him like a confession. He had a book open, but looked at it the way a magistrate looks at a plea. The Montrachet remained on the blotter, labelled at 10 o'clock by my hand, because if our visitor wanted certainty, he would have to reach for it where we could see. At 12:47, a car eased past the house and idled 30 feet down. Saul wouldn't honk. He doesn't telegraph. The clock on the mantel counted 30 more honest seconds. Somewhere in the alley, a shoe scuffed brick and then stopped, the way men do when they realize they can hear their own intentions. I went to the hall, unlocked the office door, and left it ajar. If you want a rat to enter a trap, you don't nail it shut. The kitchen door whispered against its frame. Fritz didn't squeak. Fritz never squeaks. The hall boards carried a weight that knew how to distribute itself. I was at the office threshold when the shadow crossed it. Hat down, coat wrong for the season, gloved hands made anonymous. He paused, listening. I let him hear the clock and nothing else. He slid to the cabinet with a confidence that said he had measured it before. He had a key. He used it. No probing, no scratch, no curse. The lock turned like it had been asking to. He opened the door, drew the bottle forward a finger's width, and set a soft roll of cloth on the shelf. Capsules, a sliver of beeswax, a thin-bladed knife, a folded square of sandpaper. He meant to lift the label and repress a seam, or switch the bottle for a twin in his satchel. He had done this sort of trick in rooms without clocks. "Evening," I said. He didn't jump. He froze, which is different. Then he turned his head only, and I met a face I'd already met by telephone. Blount's clerk. The courteous voice had developed a spine overnight. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "I'm here unofficially to prevent misadventure by committing one," I suggested. Wolfe didn't move. "Close the cabinet," he said mildly. "Bring the satchel to the desk." Remove nothing. The clerk looked at me. I looked at the width of the hallway and the weight of the chair. He brought the satchel. Inside was a twin bottle. Same dark glass, same vintage on a printed label that would pass dim light but not daylight. Wax already warmed in a metal capsule like a hat. There was also a corkscrew, cheap because apparently symbolism buys in bulk. "Explain," Wolfe said. "My employer has concerns," the clerk began. "Pooh, your employer lacks nerve. His concerns have hired a lackey." Wolfe tilted a finger. "You were sent to remove uncertainty. By whom?" "I can't. You can. Or you can explain to Inspector Kramer why you carry counterfeit labels and burglary keys. Choose your audience." He licked his lips. "I wasn't told a name. A messenger. Cash. A phrase I was to repeat if questioned." "What phrase?" I asked. "Let the dead rest." I looked at Wolfe. He didn't look at me. "That line has already been performed here," he said, "and you did not improvise it." The clerk at least had the integrity to flush. "I was told the bottle would ruin reputations if opened." That your employer thrives on theatre. That there was no murder, only malice. You were also told which cabinet and which key, I said. How? He looked at the floor. The man knew the room. He described the cabinet, the shelf, the angle the label faced. Which means, Wolfe said softly, he has been here. Or someone has shown him. You will not leave with that satchel. Mr. Panzer will follow you when you do leave and see whom you go to for absolution. If you go nowhere and return home like a good clerk, he will wait and see who comes to you. You are a wire, sir, not a bomb. We will see who thinks he can pluck you without noise. The clerk swallowed again and nodded because sometimes men understand when they have been measured precisely. Saul took him at the door like a doorman with manners and escorted him to the stairs and out into the thick night. I shut the office door. Wolfe regarded the twin bottle without touching it and grimaced as if the idea itself had an odor. Counterfeiters, he said, believe that surface is story. It is not. It is costume Blount, I asked. Blount is timorous, but not theatrical. He would counsel, not risk trespass. His clerk was rented. The renter may be anyone who has both fear and access. He closed his eyes. Margaret has the phrase and the keys. Simon has the impulse. Victor has the impatience. Pauline has craft, but not contempt for craft. Mr. Royce has mischief and mobility, and Ellis has pride and a cellar. He does not have reasons to come to my cabinet at midnight. He would rather be accused than be petty. The phone rang at 1:30. Saul doesn't call to make us feel useful. He took a cab to Park and 73rd, Saul said. Went up to an office with the lights on. Name on the transom says Blount and Kenner. Clark went in. 10 minutes later, an older man left by the service stairs took a different cab. I followed him. He went to West End and 89th apartment house with a doorman who knows him. Name? I asked. Royce, Saul said. He tipped like a man buying silence and went up. I covered the mouthpiece and told Wolfe. He opened his eyes. So the parasite becomes a vein. Good. Continue. At 2:20, Saul again. The clerk had left, shaken off the office, and gone home. No one knocked, no one called. The older man, Royce, stayed in, lights on, phone off the hook. A man doesn't leave a phone off the hook unless he wants to hear no one and make sure no one hears him. At 8:30, Fritz brought coffee and the news that the juniper jar was again where it belonged, threads tight, scent correct. I replaced it, he said. I will not let ghosts cook. Ellis telephoned at 9, unprompted, voice low and precise. Mr. Goodwin, I said I could not repair my error. I was wrong. A man came last night to the gate and offered me money for silence. I told him he could keep his breath for his funeral. He used the line you mentioned, about letting the dead rest. I closed the gate. I'm ready to say so, under oath. Describe him. Tall, too careful. He wore a scent that did not belong to him. He looked like a man trying on a better life. I didn't look at Wolfe when I said, "Thank you, Ellis." That helps. Wolfe didn't say open sesame or eureka. He breathed in and out once and then told me to telephone each of them, Margaret, Simon, Victor, Pauline Blount, and invite them back at noon. No promises, no threats, just the tone that means a man prefers to witness his own acquittal. I made the calls. Simon was eager and said so twice. Victor said nothing for a full second and then said he would come if it would put an end to Simon's circus. Margaret said she would attend to correct any errors. Pauline said, "Good," and hung up. Blount said he would be delayed, and then said he would not. When I finished, Wolfe had his eyes closed and his lips set. "We have given them uncertainty," he said. "They have answered with clumsy certainty. That is enough. At noon, we will remove their costumes, bring the bottle, not to open, merely to remind them which story they tried to rewrite." Noon drew them back as if a tide had reversed. Saul took coats and postures with equal indifference and parked them where Wolfe wanted. Margaret in the chair with the view, Victor by the bookcase. Simon angled toward the desk, Blount where he could see the cabinet and pretend not to. Pauline arrived last and sat as if the chair had been waiting for her. The Montrachet was again on the blotter, labeled at 10 o'clock, a still life with nerves. Wolfe didn't waste air on greetings. He let silence compress until even Blount's collar tried to shrink. Then he spoke in the tone he uses for facts that will not accommodate feelings. "Last night," he said, "a man with a key opened my cabinet. He brought a satchel containing a counterfeit twin of that bottle with warmed wax, a knife, and capsules." Mr. Goodwin addressed him. He identified himself as the clerk of Mr. Blount. He said he had been hired by a messenger, paid in cash, and instructed to repeat a pious phrase if challenged. After he left Mr. Panzer followed him to Mr. Blount's office. From there, a second man departed by a service stair and went home to West End Avenue. His name is Daniel Royce. Royce wasn't there to register outrage. Margaret's eyes did a single unladylike thing and snapped to Blount. Victor said something under his breath that didn't improve the furniture. Simon smiled the way men smile when they can't think of a better expression. Blount's fingers made a small church steeple and trembled. "I did not send my clerk," he said tightly. "He will be discharged." "You will do nothing until the police have measured him," Wolfe said. "He was not acting on your behalf. He was rented. Mr. Royce paid for him. The question is, who paid Mr. Royce? Simon found his voice first because of course he did. Why would anyone hire Daniel to do that? If truth exonerates us, why fear a bottle? Wolfe turned his head an inch. Because truth threatens a narrative. Mr. Royce, who sells stories attached to glass, knows the price of both. He was tasked to prevent my opening, to maintain uncertainty. He also carried a line into my house. "Let the dead rest." It arrived first as a note. It was offered at the Nash Gate last night with money Ellis refused. Whoever employs Mr. Royce prefers that line because it cloaks self-interest in virtue. Margaret drew herself taller. "If you imply that I imply nothing," Wolfe said, which for him is the preface to implying everything. "You objected to opening yesterday. That aligns with your ethic, but not uniquely with your interest. Others here urged me to open, publicly. Privately, they acted to stop it. That is the more interesting contradiction." Victor's glance slid to his brother as if on a rail. "Simon always does two things at once. It's his genius." "My genius," Simon said coolly, "is to protect what's left of the Nash name while you circle it like a buzzard. Mr. Wolfe, if you have an accusation, make it. If not, stop polishing it." Wolfe closed his eyes a moment and opened them on Simon. "At our meeting yesterday, your thumb rubbed your cuff and left a dull residue. You are meticulous, but not in the ways that count. It was beeswax. I smelled it in my cabinet after the bottle had been turned. It is the same cheap wax that arrived with the counterfeit. It is not in Fritz's kitchen and never has been. You had been handling a capsule. At whose behest?" Simon laughed, but the sound had no core. "I lit a candle at home last night. If you want to charge me with romance, do it." Wolfe ignored that. 3 weeks ago you told Ms. Leclerc that you would take care when she warned of a disturbed rack. You stole keys with stories and returned them with compliments. You pressed me to open the bottle, loudly, while arranging to prevent it quietly. That is a pose, Mr. Nash. Poses are for portraits. This is inquiry." Blount cleared his throat like a man volunteering to be run over by a lighter car. "Mr. Wolfe, the codicil is the spine of this," Wolfe said. "The old man amended it a week before the party, in your presence and Simon's, increasing Simon's portion and reducing Victor's leverage. If the death is ruled suspicious, there is litigation. If it remains a heart's failure, there is acceptance. Simon prefers litigation if he can choreograph the accusations, Victor prefers certainty if it protects him from his brother. Mrs. Nash prefers dignity and order and so denies the premise. Miss Leclerc prefers craft and resents insult to her cellar. Mr. Royce prefers a marketplace in which everyone is afraid. Pauline's mouth curved without becoming a smile. "Yes," she said simply. Victor had stopped breathing long enough for it to be visible. "You're saying Simon hired Royce to block you and keep the stink without the test. It fits him. What fits me," Simon snapped, "is the fact that if there was poison, I wouldn't bring the bottle to Wolfe." "Use your head, I am," Victor said. "I'm using both." Margaret's voice cut clean. "Enough. Mr. Wolfe, my husband died because his heart betrayed him. If there is wickedness here, it is in those using his death to scramble for a better seat. I did borrow keys. I corrected dust and counted bottles. I am not ashamed of ordering my house." "You also received a visit at your gate last night," Wolfe said. "A man too careful, wearing a scent that did not belong to him. He offered you silence. You refused it. Do you know him?" She hesitated. It wasn't fear. It was distaste. "Mr. Royce has been a gnat for years. He used to flatter. Now he bargains. He came once with lilies and left with nothing that put Royce's habits in the room even if he wasn't." Wolfe let the admission settle and then turned slightly toward Blount. "Your clerk will confirm his renter. Mr. Panzer will arrange the timing. When he does, it will reveal not only who fears the bottle, but who instructed him to use my note's phrase and my cabinet's key. That combination is rare. It belongs to the person who needed to be seen encouraging me while ensuring I could not perform." Simon's chin edged up a fraction. "If that is a delicate way of saying my name, say my name." Wolfe's eyes flattened to pebbles. "I do not say names to satisfy vanity. I say them when they are earned. For the moment, I will note only this. You are the only one here who benefits from every path. Poison proved, you cry vengeance and leverage the stain. Poison disproved, you denounce the scandal you cultivated and pose as savior. In both routes, you present yourself as indispensable. That is greed in a tuxedo color climbed into Simon's face and then decided it was a tactical error and retreated. He turned to Margaret with a practiced softness. "Aunt, he's turning your grief into an inference. Will you allow that?" Her eyes stayed on Wolfe. "I will allow truth," she said, "even if it disagrees with me." Wolfe let out a small breath. The room heard it. "Good. Then we will transform uncertainty into fact and return this bottle to its proper function, to be opened at a table, not waved as a cudgel. Mr. Goodwin, telephone Inspector Kramer. Tell him he is invited to witness an experiment and a confession. He will attend because he hates both." Simon half rose. "You said you wouldn't open it." "I said I would not open it yesterday," Wolfe answered. "Today, we will open something else first." He put one finger on the blotter and the room tilted toward it. "Mr. Nash, before Kramer arrives, you may save time by telling me which you hired first. Mr. Royce, or the lie." The room held still, the kind of stillness that feels less like silence than like breath being held. Simon stood halfway out of his chair, caught between a retreat and an advance, and for the first time since he'd walked into the brownstone, he didn't look rehearsed. He looked cornered. Wolfe didn't raise his voice. He never needs to. "Mr. Nash," he said, "you may sit or you may fall." "I prefer the former." Simon lowered himself, stiff as a man folding under duress. His smile tried to resurface, but found no purchase. "I don't know what you want me to say." "Truth," Wolfe said, "though you will attempt performance. You wished your uncle dead. You wished the codicil, drawn in Blount's office, to bloom without contest. You poisoned a bottle, but you overplayed. You placed the glass in his hand, watched him fall, and relied on the coroner's haste. That might have sufficed until you decided to gild it with my endorsement. You brought me the relic not to uncover, but to consecrate. When Miss Leclerc warned of tampering, you promised to take care. You did, by handling the bottle yourself, by beeswaxing a seam, by rehearsing alarm. And when fear crept in that I might uncover the farce, you engaged Royce to muddy it with counterfeit and sentiment. All the while you cried for truth in public while ensuring it never arrived. Simon tried to laugh again, but it had no legs. That's absurd. Why would I hire Royce to stop what I myself asked for? Because, Wolfe replied, you needed to be seen urging it. If I refused, you gained the pose of a man denied justice. If I agreed, you ensured the bottle would be swapped or sabotaged or delayed, and again you gained the pose of a man struggling against fate. In both outcomes, you were central. It is vanity disguised as strategy. Victor's voice broke the spell, rough with triumph and disgust. You staged his death and then staged yourself as martyr. Damn you, control yourself, Wolfe said. There will be time for vituperation. He shifted his gaze back to Simon. You will not confess voluntarily. Few men do when cornered by their own theatre. But you will sit until Inspector Kramer arrives. He is fond of handcuffs. Simon's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. His eyes darted toward Margaret, searching for sanctuary, but she offered none. Her grief had settled into something colder, contempt. Pauline's face was unreadable, but her hands, folded tight, betrayed satisfaction. Blount looked as though he wished to evaporate with his hat. When the bell rang and Saul ushered in Kramer, the room felt as taut as a violin string. Kramer took one look at the assembly, another at the bottle on Wolfe's blotter, and then at Wolfe himself. What the hell now? He demanded. Poison, inheritance, and vanity, Wolfe said calmly. You will find residue in that bottle if you test it. Simon Nash's handiwork. You will find Mr. Royce willing to admit he was paid to obstruct me. You will find a clerk who will confirm who engaged him. That, together with Mr. Nash's presence at every juncture, will satisfy a grand jury. Do your duty. Kramer glowered, but his men stepped forward. Simon stood when they touched his arm, color drained, and muttered something about conspiracy and lies. But there was no force in it. The door closed on him and the brownstone exhaled. Margaret rose, spine unbent. Mr. Wolfe, she said, you have ruined us, but perhaps you have saved us too. Thank you. She left without waiting for a reply. Victor followed, muttering curses in a voice that was equal parts relief and resentment. Pauline paused just long enough to say, Wine deserves honesty. At least it has found some here. Then she too was gone. When the last door clicked, Wolfe pushed the bottle an inch away, as though even its glass had absorbed folly. He reached for his beer, poured with precision, and sipped. You notice, Archie, he said, that the crime was not necessity, but vanity. Simon could have profited quietly from the codicil. Instead, he wished to be seen as aggrieved, righteous, indispensable. Men will poison their heritage to preserve their reflection. Sure, I said. But next time, let's hope their reflection doesn't involve Fritz's spice rack. That got me the faintest flare of nostrils, Wolfe's equivalent of a chuckle. He closed his eyes, content to let justice and dinner take their turns. An hour later, Fritz served the duck course reheated but none the worse, and Wolfe applied himself to it with solemn concentration. The brownstone, bruised but intact, had taken back its silence. The case had been bitter, but the taste would fade. I wrote it all down, and when I finished, I added one line Wolfe hadn't bothered to say aloud, that the worst poisons are not in bottles, but in men who think the world cannot live without them.